Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into an astrological placement where romance literally becomes an entire emotional world. If you've been following astrology for a while, you know that certain chart combinations don't just add a subtle flavor to your personality. No, they completely define how you interact with a specific area of life. So today, we're looking at the intense, beautiful, and honestly sometimes tricky dynamic of having the Moon and Venus together in the fifth house. We're going to unpack exactly how this alignment works, why it creates such a potent romantic drive, and how it completely shapes the way you experience love and creativity. Let's get into it.
This brings up a really fundamental distinction that we absolutely have to explore today. Are you attaching to a real, flawed human being, or are you just caught up in the intoxicating atmosphere of romance? When these specific planets meet in this specific house, well, that line gets incredibly blurry. It's an essential question for self-awareness, really, because it completely dictates whether your relationships are built on a genuine connection or if they're just built on a fantasy.
Section 1. The architecture of romance and its core elements.
To deeply understand how this dynamic works, we need to break down the specific astrological architecture at play here. We've got three massive energies intersecting. The fifth house isn't just about dating, it's the ultimate sector of imagination, pleasure, and speculation. Drop Venus in there, and you immediately get a massive drive for love, attraction, and aesthetics. But then, you add the Moon. The Moon represents our deepest emotional needs, our memories, and our sheer receptivity. So when the Moon's profound need for emotional nourishment meets Venus's intense desire for pleasure, all contained inside that highly imaginative fifth house, well, romantic feelings become extraordinarily satisfying. It's essentially the perfect storm for a deep, all-absorbing romantic experience.
Section 2. Falling in love with love and the emotional trap that comes with it.
Here we start to see exactly what happens when the feeling of love actually eclipses the object of love. There is an incredibly strong tendency for individuals with this placement to fall in love with the atmosphere of romance itself. You know, it's the excitement, the anticipation, the tenderness, the sheer emotional intensity that completely hooks them. And often, this happens way before they even fully understand who the other person actually is. The feeling of being desired or admired or just romantically excited, that becomes the primary goal.
And this happens because the fifth house governs imagination, acting like a giant magnifying glass for these feelings. With this placement, you don't just experience a normal crush. No, your emotional imagination goes into absolute overdrive. Think about it, a simple glance across a crowded room, a specific song playing at the exact right time, a random memory, or even just anticipating a text message. Any of these can trigger a massive emotional response. The mind begins to heavily elaborate the connection, making the everyday mundane feel utterly magical.
This mental elaboration quickly builds into a distinct, predictable cycle. It usually goes like this. First, a small gesture occurs. Then, the emotionally active mind replays those conversations, meticulously analyzes the tone, and interprets every subtle signal. Finally, a completely idealized version of the relationship is constructed right there in the mind. Now, the danger here isn't intentional deception. Nobody's trying to trick anyone. It's simply that the emotional imagination is just so exceptionally active. The real risk is unconsciously becoming attached to the beautifully crafted story you've created, rather than the real, imperfect individual standing right in front of you.
Section 3. The power of imagination and speculative romance.
This active imagination is heavily fed by this exact concept of speculative romance. Because the fifth house inherently has a speculative quality to it, you can kind of think of it as the house of taking a gamble. This combination makes a person emotionally speculative in love. The absolute peak pleasure comes from the what if. Maybe this person likes me, or maybe this could become something extraordinary. For this specific placement, the uncertainty itself is pleasurable because it provides a giant blank canvas for the imagination to just run wild.
But as you might guess, there is a flip side to this speculative high. The exact moment the relationship becomes entirely predictable, that thrilling emotional high might actually start to fade. When the maybe turns into a definitive is, well, the speculation is gone. The imagination isn't really needed anymore to fill in the gaps. For some people with this placement, certainty can actually feel a bit boring if they aren't careful, simply because that fantasy engine has completely run out of fuel.
Section 4. The creative dimension. Making art from emotion.
Now, I really don't want this to just sound like a giant warning sign, because this overwhelming energy has an absolutely beautiful outlet. Because the fifth house governs creative self-expression, and both the Moon and Venus are so deeply connected with aesthetics and emotional sensitivity, this combination produces considerable artistic talent. Seriously, When these individuals have all this swirling emotional energy from their romantic lives, they often need to transform it into something tangible. They understand their intense feelings far better when they can channel them into vivid writing, beautiful poetry, captivating music, acting, or even design.
In this way, every single romantic experience, the highest highs of happiness, the deep ache of longing, the crushing weight of heartbreak, and the bittersweet nature of nostalgia, it literally all becomes raw material. It becomes creative fuel. And this really proves that not every difficult or intense attachment is inherently bad. For these individuals, emotional stimulation, even when it's painful, can result in profound artistic expression and a much deeper understanding of the human condition.
Section 5. Elemental shifts and how the specific elements matter. Of course, astrology is incredibly nuanced, and how this dynamic actually plays out in reality depends entirely on the specific astrological sign involved in the conjunction. The elemental background changes this expression completely. For example, if this conjunction happens in a water sign, the person might literally drown in the emotional absorption and fantasy of it all. An earth sign, however, is going to ground that romantic energy into something much more sensual and security-oriented. An air sign will tend to intellectualize the connection, finding the most romance and fascinating communication and a true meeting of the minds. And a fire sign? Oh, they will turn this combination into an incredibly passionate, dramatic, and highly expressive romantic experience.
Beyond just the element, we absolutely must always look at the moon's condition in the chart because that determines the overall health of this placement. A strong moon allows the person to deeply enjoy affection and Venusian pleasure without losing their emotional footing, right? They stay balanced. But an afflicted moon, on the other hand, can turn that desire for pleasure into a really tough cycle of emotional dependency, where they're constantly seeking the high of being loved just to feel a sense of security.
Which brings us to Section 6, the evolutionary lesson and the ultimate goal.
Because at the end of the day, these placements aren't just quirky personality traits. They are profound opportunities for growth. The absolute crux of this placement is learning to distinguish genuine love from pure emotional intoxication. Real love involves seeing another person completely realistically, fully embracing their flaws and limitations. Emotional intoxication, however, is entirely self-centered. It's only concerned with the high, focusing solely on how the relationship makes you feel in the moment.
So, the ultimate evolutionary lesson for this fifth house placement is maturing away from saying, I love how I feel when I am with you, and shifting your mindset toward, I understand, I accept, and I actually value who you are. It is a massive shift from loving the mirror of your own desires to loving a real, breathing human being. As you reflect on your own attachments, your own history of romance, and how your emotional imagination operates, I want you to ask yourself this final question. Can you enjoy the beauty of love without needing the fantasy to sustain it? When balanced, this placement produces someone who experiences love deeply, creates beautifully, and gives genuine warmth. See if you can step out of the story you've written in your head and find genuine, lasting warmth in the reality of love. Thanks for exploring this with me today.